Okay, so I'm Margaret Krantz, and I am the Senior Director of Career and Professional Development in the Levett Career Center. I've been working with students for a lot of years and helping, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of students with their resumes over that time. And I've gotten very experienced in knowing how to focus on the aspects of what you can do to control your resume to make it the best document possible. And so today I'm just going to be sharing a lot of those tricks that I have refined over the years. I wanted to let you know that the documents that we use to help people with resumes are available through our website. And that's true after you graduate too. So if you find yourself needing a resume guide 3 years down the road after you've graduated or something, you can always find them through careercenter.hanover.edu/publications. This is a screen capture of just a few of the resources that are there that have to do with resumes and cover letters. Mostly, I'm going to be drawing some screen captures from the main resume guide that's listed first, and I'm also going to be referring to using ONET for resumes in today's presentation. But I have lots of other resources that are available here that you might want to explore. Maybe this is a good time to tell you that if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to interrupt me. I will keep this kind of casual. But I wanted to start off by telling you that typically when an employer is engaging with your resume, there are 3 things that they're going to be noticing sort of simultaneously. I have 2 of them on this screen. So my pie chart indicates that the most important thing is your content. That's the words that you choose to include that describe why you feel like you are a qualified applicant for that specific position. And it helps to engage the recruiter, to start to imagine you as a potential person to interview and possibly hire. And so the evidence that you choose is incredibly important, and that's content. The format is much less important. You can see that it's probably only about 10% of the impact of your resume. So I'm going to spend a lot of time at the beginning of this presentation talking to you about that big blue area because it matters so much, but we'll get to format as well. The third thing that I'm looking for is typographical flawlessness. I want your whole document to look like you took a lot of time and care with it so that I can trust that when you work for me, you're going to take a lot of care in whatever tasks I give you. This is essentially an employer's first view of your work. And so if it's got errors in it, how could they possibly trust you with their project or their children or their spreadsheet? They need to know that you are worthy of their trust. So I'm going to start off by talking about content, and that content needs to be tailored to a particular goal. That is probably bad news to you if you hadn't heard it already, because it means that if you have more than one goal, you have to have more than one resume, because in each case, each document has to be tailored toward a goal. And I should tell you that as I'm saying this to you, I'm always thinking about your next use of the resume. I'm not talking about having a general resume until you graduate and then suddenly you have to join the big boys club and start doing this tailoring stuff. I mean, if you're trying to get a summer job this summer working as a golf pro, you still need a tailored resume. There isn't a time when you won't need one. So you may as well go ahead and get started with it now. Okay, so here's what happens. You apply for a job. The employer starts to let that resume join a stack of others until they have enough time and enough resumes so that they can sit down and glance through them and make some quick decisions. And that's what they do. On the front page of my resume guide, it says a 5-second countdown begins when an employer picks up your resume. In 5 seconds, they quickly make a decision. They will skim your resume and then sort it into 2 piles. Now, anybody want to guess what those 2 piles are? You'd unmute yourself if you want to guess.
Good and bad?
Good and bad. That's a good way to put it. That's similar to what I've got here. I would call it no and maybe. And so in 5 seconds, they can make that quick decision. I'm going to rule out these resumes And usually the reasons for that are typographical errors, or that the person seems not to understand what the job is. They lack the qualifications that the person is looking for, or they're overqualified. And so they seem like a risk to an employer. They would only stay long enough to get a better job that's a better fit for their background. And so why hire and train them and invest in them and then have them leave? So it's the lack of fit and it's the lack of professionalism. So those are the things that get you put into the no pile, and then they discard the no's. If they're polite, they'll tell you that you've been eliminated. I'm sorry, but you're not a good fit. But sometimes they don't. If you're not hearing from them, it could be that that's the case, or that they are still waiting on some other, just on time to proceed with their search, for example. Once they have eliminated the no pile after 5 seconds of reading, then they move on to the maybes. And in the second, when they are taking the maybes, what they will do is divide them into smaller subcategories. A common way to do it is how close a fit they are. A low fit, not a very good fit. A medium fit, maybe I think that these people are possible choices for me, but I'm hoping that there's somebody still better. Or a high fit, a really, I'm highly interested in this person. I feel like they would be a really good, I'm going to interview them for sure. And I'm hoping that I can move fast on this so nobody else snags them before I do. And so that's usually what happens. In order to make that kind of decision, it takes a lot longer. In fact, I have the most elaborate process of anybody I know. I actually divide them into 6 stacks. And so for me, it's a 5 who is perfect in every way, exactly what I'm looking for. I think of them as walking on water. They are ideal candidates. A 4.5 is very good, has nearly everything I want, maybe not 100% of what I want, but close. But while they're lacking something, they're bringing something extra that I didn't put in my list, that I hadn't said I wanted, but now I'm excited that they have this extra trait. A 4 is missing something minor, but it's minor. I can train them on that. So if somebody is a 4 or higher, in my case, I will basically in my head guarantee them an interview. I want you to understand something I just said. You can be missing something and I still guarantee you an interview in my mind, because your background is a good enough fit so that I think that you could be a great member of my team. If you are missing something more important, then I would put you in and you're not bringing anything extra, I would put those people in, I'd call them a 3. I have occasionally interviewed 3s. I have never hired one. And then the last 2 categories for me are 1 and 2. The 1s are the people I should have shredded in the first place, and I'm shredding them now. And the 2s are the people who I think have the least enviable spot in my filing system. I don't ever, sort of release them from their pain and tell them, sorry, at least I make them wait to do that. I don't tell them you're out of the running, but nor do I consider them for an interview. They are sort of like the barrier between my 3s and the shredding pile. Somebody has to be that barrier. Somebody has to be the lowest number that I am not actually discarding, and it's the 2s. So that's how I do it. The reason I just went into that 2-minute long description is that I want you to take a couple of things away from what I'm saying. One of them is that for me to make the decision, is this person a 4 or a 4.5? I have to really comb through your resume. I'm really focusing on your background and seeing how good a fit you are. So while in the first pass, I was skimming your resume for 5 seconds and drawing quick conclusions, in the second pass, I was scrutinizing it, combing through it, hoping that you're the answer to my prayers so that I can hire you and get back to my day job instead of trying to hire somebody. So that's basically how that might look. And so a lot of what I'm telling you today has to do with how you can manage your document so that it accomplishes both the goals of being skimmable and being scrutinizable. Okay, so a lot of people bring their resumes to me, and what they
Can I
have
ask you a
done.
question about that
Sure.
previous part?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Um, it seems like most of what you were talking about is like for highly applied jobs where there's like multitudes of people. What about like for smaller jobs where they don't have to filter through that many applications at a time?
Okay. So that's a really good question. I would say that there are still people who are clearly not qualified, who are just fishing, like they're applying for every job that comes across the pike, and an employer won't waste their time interviewing them. And can you give me an example so that I can make sure that my comments are useful to you?
Um, Maybe just like a smaller business, like a local business or something, they're applying and they don't have that many applicants,
Okay, and so your
many
question is,
resumes.
would they divide them into categories
Yeah,
that
like
are
will the
only?
categories be the same? Would it need to be taken out?
I think what they would at least do is say, these are the people I want to be sure to interview, and these are the people I'll wait on if I need to. Okay. And they always make some judgment along those lines. I have sometimes heard employers say that in the first pass, they'll decide no, yes or no. I will interview you or I will discard you. But I think that's pretty uncommon. It's more common that they take more time and actually make judgments. Even if they only have 5 applicants, they're still making those judgments, ranking them in some way. And I've been on many, many searches. I've led many searches and I've been on many searches at the college. And this is basically how we all function.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
answer your question at
Yes.
all? It's still going to happen. It just won't happen in those great numbers. They're not going to be letting a huge stack of resumes pile up. They're going to be making, sort of a card sort between the 5 that they've got. But they'll put them in some kind of priority.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so as I was beginning to say, I have a lot of people bring their resumes to me. And what I've noticed is that the most common approach is to do what I call a reverse chronological autobiography. You take all the things that you have ever done and you describe them as thoroughly and as completely and accurately as you can, so that you, in the hopes that a future employer might see something of value, see some kind of a skill that they would want to hire you for based on what you have written. Um, and sometimes what people will do is they will eliminate the things that are clearly not relevant in their mind. So that's basically the most common approach of resumes that are brought to me. And so what I would say is that approach tries to have an accurate list of all past experience, so that if they ran their resume by the past boss and said, what do you think? They would go, yep, that sounds pretty accurate. That's what you did for me. However, if you think about it, unless you're actually applying to work for that boss, what they think about your resume is completely irrelevant. They aren't going to be seeing your resume. Their opinion doesn't matter. I don't want you to lie on your resume. I don't want you to misrepresent. I don't want you to exaggerate. I don't want you to obfuscate. But what I do want you to do is filter. I want you to make choices about value. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this next section is geared toward helping you to make some choices effectively. So what I think you should do is face the future employer when you're trying to decide what to say. You're learning about what they care about, what are the skills they need you to have, what are the tasks they're going to give you to do, what kinds of experience would they find relevant, and then describe those things. And you're doing 2 things simultaneously when you do that. One of them is that you are proving to them that you understand what their job is. If you're filling your resume with relevant stuff, it reassures them that you understand what you're applying for. Because if you don't understand it, they might hire you. It's unlikely, but they might. And then you might work on the job for a week and go, that's not what I thought it was, and quit. Employers hate that. If they've had to give all this time to hiring you and invest all this money in training you, and then you quit, they hate that. So this is a risk for them. And you're describing the job that you are trying to get, making a case for your skills for that reassures them that you are applying for the correct job. And then the second thing is that you're showing them that you can do it, that you can hit the ground running, that you're not going to be a huge drain on staff time until you figure out your way around the position. So focus on the future rather than the past as you're writing your tailored resume. So another way to look at this is to think about your past resume or your past experience as being in a different language from your future experience. Let's say all your past work was done in English and this future job is going to be done in Greek. What you're looking for is the overlap of language that appears in both, the words that appear in both languages. Those are called transferable skills, the things that you've done in the past that the future employer would want to know about you. But so this is just to illustrate to you that there's no point in using the jargon and the terminology of your past employer. You need to start speaking the language of your future employer. A quick way for you to keep this in mind, and this is the answer to almost every question that you might have for me if you're a typical student, is so what? Every time you're trying to decide whether to include something in your resume, ask yourself, so what? What's the point I'm trying to make? What am I trying to relay to them that would be important for them to know about me so that they would decide that they really want to hire me? Okay, I also have a couple of other metaphors to help you think about this. So first is this pie tin. I sometimes think about writing a tailored resume as getting a very good image in your head of what this position that you're trying to get looks like. What does a forensic scientist need to do? What kinds of skills and experience do they need to have? What kinds of transferable skills or personality traits are really key here? And when you have a very good image in your head, you punch that image into this aluminum pie tin and you pour your entire background through it and you shake. And the things that are in that shape land on your resume and everything else gets filtered out. So that's one way I look at it. And the other way is Frankenstein's monster. I think of this as being relevant because you may never have been that position before. You've never been in PR, but you have done related things. And so you may have written or done communication in some way that was published, or you may have represented your organization at a school fair. For example, the student ambassadors on campus have transferable skills in PR, or if you're involved in an athletic team and you are one of the people who the prospective students stay with when they're being recruited, and you're talking about the wonderful things about Hanover, that's a PR task. And so it relates to Frankenstein's monster because you may never have done PR before, but you've done an eyebrow of it here, and you've done an ankle bone there, and you've done a wrist here. And if you stitch all those little bits together, you start looking an awful lot like you've been Frankenstein's monster before. You've been a PR person before. So these are a couple of ways to start convincing yourself of your relevance to position. So I've got a little quiz for you here. These are a couple of examples of tailored resumes. And are you guys familiar with what a person in a hall director does at Hanover College? It's like the supervisor of the RAs. So you have an idea of what that might be. Well, this is a person who was a hall director at Hanover and then decided that he was going to apply for other jobs. And I have two examples of the ways that he tailored his hall director position to make himself sound qualified for other jobs. I'm going to read these to you and have you guess what job he was trying to make himself qualified for. This first one I think is a little bit harder. Okay, so listen to this and tell me what job he's trying to get. Maintained customer satisfaction within the college community, created and maintained departmental website, presented and sold new ideas and concepts for departmental operation to supervisor, advised and guided numerous organizations, supervised 6 employees in a direct capacity. Can you think of anything that sounds like he might be sounding like he's trying to convince somebody of? Don't worry about being wrong, just guess.
Manager position?
It does sound like management to me. Yes, actually, what he was going for was sales rep, but I don't think he had done that much sales in that job. He said presented and sold new ideas. He advised and guided, but yes, that's a good guess. I like management. I think he sounded like he was pretty qualified for management from it. Now listen to this one. He's describing the same job, but he's trying to get a different position. So here he's saying he enforced campus policies for the entire campus, oversaw residential section of the campus, patrolled campus regularly on foot, bicycle, and in car with campus police officer, performed building checks in coordination with campus police, responded to campus-related emergencies with or without campus police while on a 24-hour duty shift. What's he sounding like he's applying for there?
Kind of sounds like security or police or something.
Yeah, exactly. Law enforcement. Excellent. So imagine that he had described his hall director job with those second words on his sales rep job. How would that come across? Would you be willing to give him a risk? Go ahead, Cooper.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, you'd go, why is he applying for my job? He's clearly looking for something else. Do you see how that conveys that information to people? So I love that as an example to just help you sort of see what a tailored resume looks like. Okay, so this is a page on the inside cover of my resume guide that I was telling you about earlier. And it gives you an exercise to help you start to learn how to put on the head of the person who's doing the hiring, because that's what I'm trying to get you to do. I'm trying to get you to evaluate your own background from their perspective. That is a hard thing to do. And it's a hard thing for me to explain to you, but it's worthwhile. So this is an exercise that is painful, but useful. And I want to explain it. First of all, when you're writing a tailored resume, you have to name what it is that you're applying for. You can't keep it general because you can't write a tailored resume for a general without a goal. And then when you have named the goal, you come up with the main tasks that a person in that field does. That tells you what language you're speaking in. It tells you what they're going to be looking for. And then you ask yourself next to each one of those things, how have I done it? So here's an example of one of these filled out. This person happens to want to be a bank manager trainee. She says that these are the tasks that she thinks a bank manager trainee is likely to do. And then she asks herself, how have I ever done these things before? One of them is supervise and train employees. And she goes, well, I've worked at Baskin Robbins as a computer lab manager, a math tutor. I put Zeta, Zeta, Zeta on here because I often show this to people upside down and I can read it upside down in my guide. PA coordinator, vacation Bible school, Panhellenic. And so she's just brainstorming all the ways she's ever done anything like supervise people or anything like train people. She goes on to the next one. How have I ever done these things? And she names those. And the third one, and she names those. And over time, you can start to see that there are things that appear on here a lot. Zeta, Zeta, Zeta is really easy to pick. So what she did at Zeta, Zeta, Zeta turns out to be pretty relevant to being a bank manager. And she's got other things on here that are pretty relevant as well. For example, computer lab manager appears on here a lot. And that's not a big surprise that that would be relevant to bank manager. That makes some sense, right? Okay, so, but it turns out that when you ask her what she really did at Baskin Robbins, she was dipping ice cream. She wasn't managing anybody, but she did train people. The new people who came in after she had started working, she trained them. And so she got to learn, here's what I need to make sure to tell them so that they don't violate food handling protocols, for example, or so that they don't make some mistake with the cash register, or so that they don't forget to lock the store at the end of the night. Those can be important things, even if it's a job that a 16-year-old could be doing. And so if you start looking at your background through this filter, this is like the pie tin. This is punched holes in the pie tin, and it helps you to see which things matter. And once you see which things matter and what you've got in your background, you can start to see, wow, I seem to have a whole lot of stuff next to this prepare accurate financial reports. Maybe that's a strength of mine. Maybe I need to make that a prominent feature in my profile on my resume, or maybe I need to make it a point for my cover letter, which is something I'll talk about tomorrow. Does this make sense to you guys? Any questions about how to do this? Well, I have one big question, and that's how do you, oh, sorry, Cooper, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say I gotta go now, but
Oh, okay.
I
All right,
appreciate
well,
it.
I'll send you the link to this when I've got it.
Perfect.
Thanks for being here.
Yep. Bye.
When you are writing this, somehow you have to come up with this language. And I don't expect you to do it off the top of your head or to know what is required. So what I'm going to talk about next is how can you help yourself to find information that would be helpful to you. This is a website that people in career services across the country use all the time. We're all huge fans of it. It's called ONET Online. It looks like 1 ton line, but it's actually onetonline.org. And when you go here, you can type in whatever it is that you're interested in getting a job in, so nursing or forensic science, and it will provide you with a report. I didn't know what you guys were interested in, so I've got marketing in here as my example. We'll just stick with that, but you're college students, you can generalize. Okay, so here, when you first click on it, it'll give you a list of things to choose from. Here's what we think you mean. Pick the one that you really want. And then when you've picked it, it will take you to this report. And I want you to notice a few things quickly here that will be helpful to you. One is that it will give you a summary of what that job is. And that will help you to go, yeah, this is the thing that I thought it was. This is what I'm interested in. So now I can start tailoring my resume around this. Another thing that's really helpful when you're in the search mode is that it tells you what the job titles are so that you know what to search for, because it's not necessarily called what you think. Sometimes I'll be searching for something like brand manager and it takes me to marketing manager and I'm going, well, that's not what I want. I don't want to manage people. I just want to manage brands. And so the brand manager is one of the alternate job titles. So do keep an eye on that. But this is helpful when you're writing your resume because it starts to tell you the tasks that you're likely to do. I'm going to slip back up here. Do you remember how I said I want you to list the 10 major tasks? This provides you with those tasks. So when you first click on it, you'll be taken to the summary tab, and that gives you basic information. It's usually a top 10 list. And it just gives you the summary materials. But if you click on details, then what it will do is break it down into additional information that will be helpful. For example, it will start to tell you whether these tasks are core tasks that you do day in and day out and presumably need to be quite good at, or supplemental tasks that happen less frequently. And it also lists them in descending order of importance so that you can see, wow, these are core tasks that are really important. So I probably really need to be able to prove to them that I can do these things. Sometimes though, the most important one on the entire page is the first supplemental one. You don't do it very often, but you better do it well because it matters. So each time it depends. If you look it up, click on that details tab, it will take you here and you can get this information. Now, what I do with students when I'm helping them is I print this out. I go to the XLS table here and it gives me a one-page printout. And then I give them a highlighter and I have them highlight all the words on their page that they think they have done in the past. And when they've done that, I have them write on a separate sheet of paper beside each one of these how they've done it. And that kind of takes you back to this, where I'm basically doing all of this, but ONET has helped me. So this is the stuff that I'm asking them to highlight, and then I have them brainstorm all the ways they've done those things before. Does that make sense to you guys? And so please remember that this isn't enough. You really need to take that extra step. Otherwise, you're going to miss really valuable things in your background that that employers will want to know about you. Questions about this? Okay. There's another thing on ONET, the knowledge section, and this gives you more sort of broad ranging skills, like you need to be able to have familiarity with sales and marketing or best practices in sales and marketing, any administration and management background that you have these are obviously different for each field, but I would encourage you to play around on ONET and see if there are extra features that it offers that would help you to get a clue of the kinds of things that future employer values. That's what I'm trying to orient you to. What do they care about so that you can tell them that? Okay. Anything about ONET? Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is format. While it's not anywhere near as important as the content, it's extremely important in those first 5 seconds. So you can't ignore it. Okay, so these are a couple of pages in my resume guide. And what I'd like you guys to do is just glance at these two. I'm going to give you a few seconds, and then can you see whose this resume is? Can you see that it's Charles Babbage? Okay. I've got it blocked with my computer. So what I would like you to do is glance at these two and then put in the chat which one you find easier to read and make sense of. You can either say Charles or Rachel. I don't want you to take much time, just glance at it. Go ahead and write one in the chat. Oh, you both answered already and I didn't see it. I apologize. Okay, so sorry. I'm going, what? Yes, what you have chosen, you both chosen Rachel, and I have asked probably 900 students that over the last dozen years, because I went to a marketing class and I was talking to them about marketing themselves through their resumes. And I wanted to explain to them how the format of your resume can make a difference. I talked to 3 sections that day, 75 students, and I had them vote, which of these two do you like better? 75 students chose Rachel's. And I went, that was brilliant. I have to leave those resumes in my guide forever so that I can explain some things about formatting. Since then, as I said, I've asked, like the whole Phi Mu house and so on. And I'm at about over 900. I long since have lost track of how many people have said that they like Rachel's more, but we're at 37 who like Charles Babbage's more. So that's a tiny fraction. And that doesn't mean those people are wrong. It just means that they're unusual. And I want to explain to you what some of the factors are that are at work in my experience that would make so many more people prefer Rachel's to Charles. First of all, let me hear from you what you like better about it. Would anybody like to tell me what they liked about Rachel's or disliked about Charles?
Yeah, I liked that you could see like the education and just the different categories that are needed in a resume. First thing to check for, like if you're looking for a certain thing, then you can check that off really quickly.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I also think like on Charles' resume, like everything just seems to kind of run together, like the experience, the skills, education, like it all just seems to be like one big paragraph or like list. But on Rachel's, I can see that there's clear differences on what she's talking about, like what section she's trying to put it in.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people will say that Charles's looks disorganized or jumbled, that hers makes more sense just intuitively. I can tell you that these two resumes were in my guide when I first started doing this, because Charles is representing how to do a scanned resume for an applicant tracking system, an ATS. And what those are is huge employers like Eli Lilly or the CIA program a scan for any field that they're hiring for. And if you have the keywords that they're scanning for in your background on your resume, then it will be spit out into a list. So if you, for example, if they're trying to find somebody who has a computer science major and you have a communication major, then under education, it's blank. You don't have any education as far as they're concerned because you didn't have their keyword. So that's the reason that that thing is so ugly. It's not meant to be seen by the human eye. It's following rules that make it easier for a scanner to make sense of it. And the rules are in my resume guide so that you could see what they are if you ever find yourself in that situation. Rachel Carson's resume is filled with tricks to make you want to read it and to make it easier for you to process. I think of it as being like a flower that's attracting a hummingbird. And so I'm going to explain to you what it is that made it so much more effective. First of all, there are 3 colors on both of these resumes. There's black, where you have a concentration of ink. So wherever there's bold or bullets, that's black. There's white, where there's no ink whatsoever, here, for example. And then there's gray. And I think Charles Babbage is filled with gray. I think of it as being like a vat of cold oatmeal that you have to wade through visually. It does not attract you or draw you in. It repels you. If you're going to go with the cold oatmeal idea, you could think of the black as being kind of like brown sugar, and maybe the bullets being like raisins, and the spaces between being like milk. And each one of these is a nice little bite-sized piece that you can make sense of. Does that make, do you see what I'm getting at? So I think that's one of the things that matters. This has just used color better than was true on the previous page. So what happens when you use color is that it makes those things pop. It allows the writer to control what the audience sees, what they are going to experience. So you want to use color effectively. But anything that's anomalous will draw their eye. Anything that is not regular old gray font is regular old alphabet, A to Z, is anomalous, and it might or will draw their eye. So another example of that is numbers. You might have noticed Rachel Carson's GPA. And if you did, it was because it was numbers. You might have noticed the fact that she had HPLC on here in parentheses. And that is because in today's world, we think of uppercase as shouting. She was shouting HPLC over here. She has C++ and C#. Those stand out because they're punctuation. They draw your eye. Do you see how that works? So when you want to make a case to draw your people's eye to something, remember that anomalies will help to do that. Okay, I want to show you another example of that while I'm also telling you another formatting thing that I think is helpful to know. Okay, we have 3 different excerpts of resumes on this slide. What I would like you to do is to find the excerpt 1, 2, or 3 that you think is the easiest to find the dates, and the one that's hardest to find the dates. So I find the one where the dates are easiest to spot and put that number in the chat. I promise to look in the right place. Okay, that's interesting. So Mariah, why do you think that this 3rd one is easiest?
Because they're isolated all by themselves.
Yeah, I personally, I would, and then which one do you think is the hardest to find the dates? 1, 2, or 3, depending on what you've already answered.
Number 1.
Okay, and Reagan, you think that 1 is also the hardest to find? Okay. I would agree. Personally, my feeling is that the ones that are easiest to find are 3. And it's partly because they are isolated over on the right. So there's a lot, it's hard to tell from an excerpt. If I had shown you the whole page, it would have been way more obvious, because what happens is over time, there's a whole new margin that appears over here, and it catches your eye because it is anomalous. And there's all this white space in the middle of the line, which is also anomalous. But there's a second thing that makes this easier to see than that. And so what would you say that is? You guys all said this was hardest to see. Why is that?
I think also because like the only thing that's in bold is the first like description or title, whatever.
Mhm.
And then it's back and forth between italics, and then on the second one it's regular type, and then it's italics, and then it's the dates. And there's nothing that makes it like stand out besides it all just being clumped together.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that you pointed out the italics, because I want to get back to that. That's an important thing to mention. I think that this one, number 2, is easier to see than number 1 because these are in parentheses. It's going to draw your eye because it has punctuation around it. It just simply does. It's more likely to be seen. Now, I want to tell you guys that I personally think the best strategy for you is to make your dates hard to find. This is actually the better choice as far as I'm concerned for college students. If you were people who had had long careers and you had had regular promotions or advancements through your work and so on, making your dates very obvious is a good strategy because it shows that you have this unbroken work experience. But for college students who are working in the summer or over break or for 5 hours during the school year, you have very fragmented work experience, a little bit here and a little bit there. Making how fragmented it is really obvious is a bad strategy in general. I mean, there's an exception to every rule, but you get what I'm saying, correct? So don't assume that just because it's easy to see that that's good. Personally, my feeling is that it isn't. I wanted to get back to your point up here, Reagan, about the italics. This, you can't tell from this excerpt, but this resume is actually geared to make this, to apply for an editing position. And so these are publications, and that's why they're in italics. So it's hard, you know, it's, thank you for pointing that out because it looks like it's violating a future rule that I'm going to give you. So, okay. Whoops. All right. So this is an excerpt from my resume guide, which I told you can get online or you can pick up in the Career Center. Here is an actual physical copy of it. It's free. And on page 8 of that guide is a summary of these tips that I'm telling you. And I really enjoy, I really like my tricks. So I would like for you to sort of have them to refer to. In each case, I have a description of it, and then I have an excerpt so that you can see it in action. So I'm just going to walk you through what some of these tips are. The first one is the hot zone. People read English from top to bottom and left to right, which means that when they're beginning any document, they're starting at the top left. It makes sense when you think about it, but you probably had never named that to yourself before. If somebody is only spending 5 seconds to skim your resume, they are going to be highly biased toward their entry point. And here is a heat map, they're called, to show you how that might look. This is a heat map of people, where people linger when they're looking at a web page, but I'm sure that it works the same way with a resume. So the red shows you what they focused on most, and then next the yellow, and finally the blue, or nothing whatsoever. So you can see that the hot zone is toward the top left. The cold zone is toward the bottom right. And if you had a second page, it would be the Arctic Circle. In 5 seconds, nobody turns to page 2, or it would be very unusual. Don't put anything important, really relevant at the bottom because they won't see it. Do you see how that is? Shove your best stuff to the top. That's why you always start with your name. And that's why college students always include their educations way up at the top, because the best thing that you've got right now is your education. Usually your work experience is weaker than your education at this stage. That won't always be true, but it is right now. Questions about the hot zone? Okay, the next trick is length. In newspaper terminology, this is called column inches. They can tell how important a newspaper article is by how many inches it's given. If you called this one number 1 and this one number 2, which would you say is the more important?
Number 1,
Number 1, why?
because it takes up more space.
Yeah, simple enough. And it's also above it. So it also is a hot zone issue. But yeah, it takes up more space. I put this in Greek so that you would not be distracted by what it says. And instead you would just simply be engaging with how much ink is involved. This has twice as many bullets as this does. So if the person made good choices about describing these two things, then they think that that first job is more relevant. They're forcing the person who's reading your resume to think about you doing that for longer than the thing below it. So say more about the things that are relevant. I mean, I've said that other ways, but I'm showing it to you graphically. Okay, another one of my favorite tricks is repetition. If you have a particular strength that you want to convey to them, then you need to find more than one way to convey it. Not using the exact same phrasing, which is insulting and boring, but using the concepts to get that across so that they can start to see that that is a real strength of yours. I think of it as hammering in a nail. The first time I hammer a nail, it frankly bends and flies across the room, and that's why I like this graphic. But the second time I hit it, it goes in deeper, and the third time I hit it, I might sink it. It might be firmly in place. And that's how repetition works in resumes. Employers are really good at spotting patterns. And so here's an example. I had a student a few years ago who had 4 different times on her resume that she had worked with the hearing impaired. She had done it in Wollongong, Australia, and she had done it in her student teaching experience, a couple of other things. And I said, wow, it looks to me like you really want to work with the hearing impaired. And she said, I did until I went to Australia. And then I realized I really wanted a mainstream classroom that had some hearing impaired students in it, rather than a whole isolated group of hearing impaired kids. And I said, well, then you need to take at least 2 and maybe 3 of these mentions off your resume, because right now it is screaming at me. That's all I'm seeing when I'm looking at your resume. She did not follow my advice, and her first job was working in a hearing impaired classroom. So, I mean, people know how to read patterns. If you say something once, it's equal to everything else, except where it appears on the page. If you say it a second time, you're making an issue of it. If you say it a third time, it's the pivotal point around which your resume rotates. So use that to your advantage. Repeat the concepts, not the phrasing, for the things you really want them to get. And don't repeat things you don't want them to get. It can backfire on you just as much as it can advantage you. Okay. And then the last trick I was going to tell you about is consistency. This is the one that people think is the only thing that really matters about any resume. It's my last trick in my 10% of the wedge. So I don't think it's that, you know, it's not the one thing that matters, but it definitely makes a difference in that first 5 seconds. So when you choose a style, use it absolutely. So for example, if your headings need to be in the same order each time, formatted the same way. In this case, I have this in Times New Roman. I have the job title first and I have it in bold, and then the comma after it is also in bold. The employer follows with a non-bolded comma, and the date follows that. And if I'm going to do that once, I have to do that on every single entry into that section. Okay? I can't vary it. You also want to make sure that the dates are in reverse chronological order, because that, and put all the things that are through the present in simple present tense, and all the things that are in the past in simple past tense, the things that you've already completed in simple past tense. Make sure that if you have two verbs like developed and implemented, make sure that both of them are in past tense. And so those are a couple of tips about that. I want to show you what I mean about matching and formatting here. What I've got is something that ends in May 2020, and then beneath it, something that ends in May 2019. All that matters is the end date. I don't care about the month. I care about the end year. I don't care about the month, and I don't care about the beginning date. So if you have 6 things on your resume that are all through the present, put them in the order that you most want them to see. Put your best stuff in the hot zone. If you have 2 things that are through the present, put them in the better order for you. And the same goes for everything that follows. Always within the same year, you can put them in the order that works best for you. However, what often happens is that somebody is, I don't know, working at the 1827 cafe this semester, and so it's through the present. And then they had this internship over the summer that's now complete. And if they follow a reverse chronological order, that cafe job goes above the internship. And that's clearly not what you want as far as relevance for most jobs. So what I recommend you do is separate those into separate sections. So you would have your related experience in its own section above, right beneath your education, and you put it in reverse chronological order within that section. And then you can put all the other stuff in additional sections, like you could call it additional experience or leadership experience or extracurricular, or whatever section title works for you. Don't divide it by paid and unpaid. Divide it by related and not, less related, however you want to phrase that. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so I just want to explain to you about these dashes. When I say be consistent, I want you even to have your dashes match. This is something that really gets on employers' nerves, and students, it's invisible to students. So here, for example, this is called an N dash. The way that I made this was that when I typed it, I wrote 2017 space hyphen space May. And when I hit return, Microsoft said, oh, you put a space on either side of your dashes. That must mean you want an N dash. And it turned my hyphen into this longer, skinnier thing. And in fact, I did want an N dash. Anytime your hyphen stands for a word, so what I really mean here is 2017 through May 2020 or 2017 to May 2020. When it stands for a word, put a space on either side of it as if the word itself were there. And that will put an N dash in its place. You don't want an N dash in your phone number. You don't want it in the word entry level. You want it in a place where it stands for a word, okay? Just make sure that your dashes all match each other, that's all. Okay, and then your margin headings should match. If you're gonna put your headings in like education and work experience and so on, if you're gonna put it in bold, then you need to put it in bold every time. If you're gonna use a colon, use a colon every time. If you're gonna put a period at the end of the sentences, put a period at the end of every single sentence or no sentences. Figure out what your strategy is and be consistent. Okay, if you go to our website, careercenter.hanover.edu/students, and then to PC tools, there's a rubric that will help you to sort of judge how strong your resume is. And you might want to take a look at that just because it will walk you through some of these things and help you to look more objectively at your resume. So I would recommend that you try that out. Do you need me to wait for a second so that you can copy that down, or are you good to go? And then the last one I had mentioned is that your resume needs to be typo-free. It's not on my pie chart, so I didn't I had to hand write it in because it doesn't get you credit. Nobody says, I love your resume more because it's typo free. They just put you in the no pile if it isn't. So you can see that I have actually seen resumes passed around when we were doing a search where the staff will start marking it up. And it's not just in the Career Center that they do that. It's really, you have to make sure that you catch everything. In my resume guide, I actually have a fraction of what used to be a much longer ode to the spelling checker that shows that there are plenty of words that spell check won't catch that are mistakes. So I recommend that you actually read your document out loud because it will help you to spot some of those and slow you down so that you can notice that your compound verbs, for example, are not both in the same tense. So, okay, these are a few things that people in the past have asked me about. Rather than going through each one of these, what I would ask you to do is if you've got one of these that you want me to talk about, then if you could either just say so, unmute yourself and say so, or put it in the chat, I'll cover whatever ones you're interested in.
I have a question, but it's not one of these.
Okay, please.
So like, well, I just lost it. Okay, you can talk about number 2 first.
Okay, I'll do that, and then you can come back and remember it. Profile versus objective is an interesting question. Objectives have sort of, you can see examples of both in my resume guide. A profile is usually a bulleted list of the things that you think make you most qualified for that specific job. And they definitely need to be tailored and relevant. And anything that you put in there needs to have some sort of context down below that proves it. For example, if you're going to say that you have outstanding communication skills, I want to see some examples of how you use those communication skills through speaking at the executive committee of your Greek house, for example. You can't just claim it without having some kind of a way to prove it later on in your resume. But that's what a profile is. An objective says, to obtain an entry-level position in public relations that will use the following skills. For example, it's usually a very short, pithy sentence that helps an employer to understand why you're writing to them. The reason that they're less frequently found today is that what usually happens is that you upload your resume to a website that says, put this code in here to help us route your resume into the right hands. And so by doing that, that routing number or that coding actually forms the objective. There isn't any need for it. So it's obsolete. So if you're giving your resume to somebody and not coding it in some way, it may still be valuable for you to include an objective. Does that help? If you want to see examples, like I said, you can find them through the resume guide. I have a few examples of both. Okay, did you remember what your question was, Reagan?
Yeah. So I've taken not that I've taken, anytime I've had resume writing help before, they always say like have a personal statement or a personal summary, like towards the top. We didn't really discuss that in this one. Is that still something that like employers, like that stands out to employers before they start looking at anything else on your resume?
I would use that as another way of saying profile. I mean, there are various different names that they could be called: summary, highlight of skills. So I think that it can be a really good way to engage the employer as long as it pulls out your greatest strengths and that they are relevant or transferable into this future field. There's no value. There's actually a detriment to describe strengths of yours that they aren't interested in. It shows them that you don't understand their job and that you don't really want it, that you want something that would let you use your strengths. So that you can blow it with the way that you do it. But if you do it well, I think it can be very effective. I have a very strong bias against paragraphs. I don't like the profile or summary to be in paragraph form. I don't like the work experience to be in paragraph form because people can't skim paragraphs in 5 seconds. Okay. All right. So good question. Anything else that you guys want to talk about from this list? There's one that I want to talk about. The answer to number 6 is no, you can't use a template. Those are wizards. Those kinds of things sort of prompt you to fill out a resume. And then when you're done answering its questions, it spits out a document. But employers hate them. They think, I mean, I'm speaking in global terms, but I have had employers tell me, tell your students not to use templates because we think they're either stupid or lazy. I love conveying that information to students. So which are you, stupid or lazy? It's just such a happy message. So no, don't use a template. If you have it, actually, templates are not a bad way to get started. It's just not something you can ever give to somebody. Okay. So again, this is a reminder of those publications that I had told you about. And then one other resource. We have lots of people over here, 12 hours a day, we can help you with your resume. So the Levett Career Center staff is highly experienced in helping people go over their resumes. We're here from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You can make an appointment with me or with other people who do that through Handshake. And then we also have the career peer mentors who have gone through 30 hours of training to help students with this. They work from 7 to 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday. If you want to work with them, you can go to career peer, email ccpeermentors@hanover.edu, and it will send you an auto reply that has a link to bookings where you can make an appointment with them. Okay. Any last questions that you guys have before we finish?
So it's kind of last minute, so I understand if you're busy, but do you have a few minutes to look at what I have? I have an interview tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
So
Hang on after we're done talking, okay?
perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anybody else or any other questions?
I have just a couple more.
Okay.
It's more about like after you send in your resume, is there like a general time that you should wait to hear back before you should just move on?
Oh, such a good question. I absolutely believe you should follow up. And usually what I recommend you do is to put your foot in the door, is what I call it, which means that at the end of your cover letter, you just send them a message that says, I'll follow up in a couple of weeks to see if you need any more information. But if you haven't done that, usually there's no point in writing to them before a week has elapsed. And it's probably pretty common to let a couple weeks elapse. And I have to tell you, in searches I have done, when people have followed up once or twice, it's not that I'm holding off on contacting them because I'm not interested. It's because I have a day job and I'm trying to do this hiring when I can fit it in. And so for somebody to respond to me a couple of times, that tells me they're really interested and I will remember them differently. If they do it well, if their contact with me is professional and typo-free, because you can blow it in any of those contacts, but as long as you're doing those kinds of things. I just wanted to say again that I'm very interested in this position. I believe I'm well qualified for it. I'm glad to provide more information if you would like. I can be reached here. I'll check back in another week or so, something like that. Those are really great. That's a great thing to do.
Is there a good way to find, like, if you apply to a company, but it doesn't say who, like, the hiring person is? Like, is there a good way to find out where you would send, like, a follow-up email?
Yeah, that's hard to do in some cases. And I have a workshop where I talk about that more specifically. But sometimes they're trying to protect people from being found. So if they have definitely not named it, then you might find some blind alleys. One of the ways that I look for it is to go on LinkedIn and see if I can find, search for that job title, human resources, Sylvania, and the office, and see if I can find it that way. Sometimes you can find it through other sources, like you might have an alum who works at that organization, and they might be able to track it down for you. Or there are a whole lot of different strategies. There used to be a website where if you were willing to give some information about yourself, they would let you be able to find human resources people, but that's sort of not being maintained right now. So
I have one more.
Mhm.
So after after this workshop, after tailoring my resume, just is it like generally acceptable to resend resumes if they've been like updated or completely changed?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually
Okay.
a good reason to reach out to them. Hey, I'm just contacting you. I applied a month ago, but I've since then earned 2 awards and completed another task. And I wanted you to have a current copy of my resume. It's attached. So yeah, absolutely, you can do that. It's a good excuse. Anything
Thank
else?
you.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on one moment.